How big a boost did the Falcons get from A.J. Terrell's return? And did their pass rush turn a corner? We'll be breaking down the All-22 from the Falcons win over the Bears, answering your listener questions about the Falcons linebackers, all on today's Locked On Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. I now go by the alias of Sirius Black, Mr. Drew. And of course, I'm still the very humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, who are helping you find the right candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. And guys, we thank you for making Locked On Falcons on this very thankful week of Thanksgiving here in the States, where at least 90% of my audience is currently listening. And we thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, it's free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube. Hit that bell, give us a like, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So we are coming to you Tuesday evening on YouTube, and Wednesday morning, afternoon on your preferred audio platform in most cases. And of course, these shows are the All-22 review and Q&A episode. And so we're breaking down the All-22, and let's talk mostly in terms of the All-22 about the defense, because that was the thing that was most impressive from the Falcons on Sunday in their win against the Bears. And one of the things I said, coming off of that win was I wanted to see the All-22 to sort of see, whether or not the improvement for the Falcons defense was, due to the return of A.J. Terrell. Like, you can't really tell watching the TV copy, what's going on in the secondary. And so that's part of the reason why it's harder. I won't say impossible, but it's harder to really evaluate quarterback play and secondary play if you're not watching the All-22. And there were a couple of times on Sunday where we kind of saw Justin Fields hold on to the ball, leading to some scrambles, leading to some sacks, whether he couldn't find an open receiver. And I wanted to know how much of that was, on the quarterback not seeing things, or how much of that was the Falcons secondary actively making it hard for him. And, we know that the Falcons coverage has not been great the last couple of weeks. And so, the previous weeks, it would have definitely been more on the quarterback than the coverage making it hard. But, you wonder, okay, is A.J. Terrell, with him back in the lineup, was that a big part of their improvement? That leads us to our first question from a listener, from Maurice Brown at Mo Headliness on Twitter. He asked, if you don't mind, can you look into how big an impact A.J. Terrell's return made to the pass defense? And I think Maurice sent this in on Sunday afternoon after the game. And so that's why first come, first serve, guys. You got to get those questions in via Twitter at Locked On Falcons, the Discord. We got some later on, Locked On Falcons link in the description below, or you can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com. But I think the answer is it was a mix of both. Some of it's on the quarterback, some of it is on improved play from the secondary. I think it was clear to me watching the film that Justin Fields was generally avoiding throwing towards A.J. Terrell's side of the field, which did lead to Darren Hall getting picked on, particularly early in this game in the first half. Hall did get beat by Darnell Mooney, where he fell down on what could have been a would-be touchdown. Fields overthrew that ball. Then it was also sort of a third down where Equiminius St. Brown beat Hall in the second quarter. That extended a drive that ultimately capped off in a Bears touchdown on a Justin Fields run. And that was an instance of Hall just kind of showing poor discipline, got beat by a whip route, got a little bit too far inside, and lost sort of contained when St. Brown broke outside. And I think there were a couple of times where Fields just kind of missed some throws where he just either didn't see it or he saw it, came off of it too early, or just didn't have the anticipation. There was one time in the third quarter where he had a check down to David Montgomery for 13 yards. But on that particular play, Darnell Mooney beat A.J. Terrell in the speed out. Terrell fell on his back pedal and Fields just came off the throw. That was his primary read, and he came off it basically like 0.1 seconds too early. And wound up checking the ball down to Montgomery. And had he thrown that and ripped it to Darnell Mooney, who was open on that play against A.J. Terrell, probably would have been like a 20-yard gain on that particular play. And then you look at the play where he got a sack, or Fields was sacked, and Abdul Anderson got that sack on, I think, on the opening play of the third quarter, where he missed a wide open Darnell Mooney over the middle. And that was a situation where Fields was looking for that. That was his primary read, and he just didn't pull the trigger. And I think that's, without having the full context of watching a ton of Justin Fields tape this year, this is, a sign of his youth. This is a sign of him not necessarily anticipating throws. And that's not necessarily something that I think Justin Fields has done a ton of going back to his days at Ohio State, and just kind of needing to see that route coming open with that soft spot in the Falcons zone over the middle. And didn't. And that led to him holding onto the ball and allowed guys like Abdul Andersen, Lorenzo Carter, Timmy Horn, all to sort of collapse the pocket and get that sack. And so I could probably wind up spending hours talking about Justin Fields, but I'm not going to. It's just, this is what happens where you're a team like the Bears actively developing a young quarterback. You're much more interesting, right? It's just you become, more interesting to watch and evaluate and break down from a film standpoint when you're actively developing a young quarterback, which is something that Arthur Smith refuses to do. But we won't get into that on today's episode. Notably on the coverage end, again, I think A.J. Terrell was a solid addition, was an upgrade. But, basically the moral of the story is the Falcons had trouble covering Darnell Mooney in this game. And some of that was on A.J. Terrell. A lot of that was on other players, and had Fields and Mooney linked up a couple more times. This would have been a much more problematic game for the Falcons on the back end. But other things to note watching the film and charting this defense, the Falcons were primarily in cover 3 in this game. I charted about cover 3 on 74% of their snaps, which is a really high number for the most part. For this Falcon team. And, what was notable when they did play cover 3 is they did ask A.J. Terrell to play a lot closer to the line of scrimmage. He played a lot more sort of press in that situation, as opposed to off coverage, which is more typical when you see teams utilizing cover 3. And I assume that's because they wanted the cornerbacks closer to the line of scrimmage in case, Fields ran it. So we'll see about that. But I will link to several of those plays I've mentioned, as well as any others I discuss later on today's episode in the comments below. I'll put up, clips of those on my Twitter at FalcFans and link to those tweets in the comments below. So definitely check out all of those. Locked On Falcons also will, retweet those things from my Twitter as well. So all those places, if you want to get further context to the specific plays that I'm bringing up on today's episode, they should be linked in the comments below at least Wednesday morning if you're watching us on Tuesday evening. So we will leave the coverage at that point and move the conversation to concerns or questions and breakdowns of the pass rush, because we talked about extensively on yesterday's episode the Falcons' unique decision to not blitz Justin Fields as part of their strategy to contain him, and relying on getting pressure with just 4 guys, and wondering if they decided to mix up a bunch of stunts into the mix this week as a new wrinkle to enhance their pass rush. And spoiler alert, the answer is no, they didn't really dial up the stunts this week. But we'll go deeper into the pass rush and where they succeeded and where maybe they could get a little bit better as we continue today's episode. But this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. And BetterHelp I linked up with this summer and have been in therapy the last couple of months. And the thing I love about BetterHelp is that they'll assess your needs and match you with your own licensed therapist in less than 48 hours. And with me, the therapist I wanted was another person of color that I could talk to about certain things going on in my life and in the world, and wouldn't feel like I had to put up a wall. And BetterHelp was able to provide that. BetterHelp is not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. You can log on at any time, send a message to your therapist. You can do weekly video or phone sessions. A big reason why I finally signed up is because BetterHelp is more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is also available for those of you that need it. And I know that was a big sticking point to me and why I was reluctant to try therapy, because it just seemed very expensive to me. But now I'm looking at it with BetterHelp as a affordable way to invest in myself. And if you're looking to make a similar investment, all you got to do is head to the website, take advantage of this special offer, buy and get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. And guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. And for your second listen today, why not check out Locked On Sports Today, where you can get the insights not only in football, but basketball, baseball, soccer, all that and more, college sports, that only the Locked On local experts can provide by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today, available on Odyssey, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. So let's talk about the pass rush. And we touched upon a little bit of this on yesterday's episode, talking a little bit about Mike Rothstein of ESPN's article discussing the Falcons' relatively unique strategy to not blitz Justin Fields. According to his breakdown, they blitz Fields on 1 out of 30 of his dropbacks in this game. And prior to this point, teams had been blitzing Fields on like 38% of his dropbacks, which I think the article said was like the second highest in the NFL. Now, when I did my charting, I counted 2 blitzes, but definitions of blitzes do vary, right? Some people only count when you bring 5 or more guys, which the Falcons did one time in this game. I also count those creepers as blitzes, those things where you bring like a linebacker or a defensive back from the second level, and then you usually drop and you replace that guy in coverage, typically with an edge. That's often Lorenzo Carter in the Falcons situation. And it's really basically a 4-man blitz. And the Falcons did that one time. That's the primary way that the Falcons tend to bring pressure. So depending on your definition, like you'll see some stats that say the Falcons are, one of the league's least inclined to blitz teams in the league. But I think those are only really counting those 5-man pressures or 6-man pressures or whatever. But if you factor in 4-man pressures, and again, I don't know where the Falcons rank league wide, but I would imagine they're much higher in terms of the frequency of utilizing those. So, depending on your definition, they blitzed 1 or 2 times in this game. So clearly the Falcons, on those other 28, 29 dropbacks were looking to get pressure with just sort of their front 4. And it did result in 4 sacks. And one of those came on a stunt. And so one of the things I was curious to see is like, okay, when I go back and watch the film this week, were they dialing up more stunts than usual? And the answer is no. Right. I only counted 3 stunts in this game. Maybe I missed one in the second half, but all 3 of them were in the first half. One did lead to that Grady Jarrett sack at the beginning of the second quarter. The other 2 did not really generate pressure. And this is something I noted on yesterday's episode when discussing this was, Dean Pease has so far in basically a year and plus of being the defensive coordinator has not been as big a fan of stunts, twists, games, whatever you want to call them, as the previous regime was. And my personal opinion is that's kind of holding back this pass rush from reaching its full potential. The other thing that stood out to me reviewing this game and charting this game, and we talked about on yesterday's episode, was I noted that Pro Football Focus had the Falcons getting pressure on Justin Fields on 53% of his dropbacks. So I think 17 out of 32 dropbacks, which was the second highest in the NFL this past weekend. Now, when I charted it, I had the Falcons pressure rate at like 38%, which was 12 out of 31 dropbacks. I know in Mike Rothstein's ESPN article, they had it at 40%, which is basically 12 on 30 dropbacks. And the discrepancy on whether it was 31, 32, kind of depends. Like there was a couple of RPOs in this game where you're like, was that a design run or was that a true pass sort of situation? But regular listeners know that, 38% is still a good number. Quite obviously not quite as good as 53%. Anything above 35% is a good pressure rate. And this is not the first time me and PFF have disagreed on the pressure rate. Like going back to the Bucs game, I felt like they kind of, lowballed us on the pressure rate in that game, and probably overrated it. So probably over the course of the season, it winds up, balancing out in the end. So this is not, an excuse for some of you guys to be like, oh, this is PFF is trash. You're allowed to disagree, on subjective things like what is a pressure in that regard. But what was notable on those 12 times where the Falcons did get pressure based off my charting, half of that pressure was unblocked pressure, right? There was 2 sacks on like poorly designed or executed screenplays where they were able to basically get a defender in there, mostly unblocked, to pressure Fields and get a sack. There was one on that 5-man pressure that we talked about before where Mykal Walker came unblocked off the edge. And then there were 3 more times where the Bears basically were utilizing play action and there was an unblocked defender off the edge. So basically I bring this up because my hope was that the Falcons pass rush was showing progress, even going up against a weak Bears offensive line. And my conclusion after watching the film was, the pass rush was not nearly as impressive as some of the numbers, like that 53% number and the 4 sacks seem to indicate, right? I feel like the pass rush looked better more due to the Bears' badness, whether you want to put that on the quarterback, whether you put that on an offensive line, than necessarily the Falcons, taking a step. However, despite that general conclusion, I do think there are 2 indicators of promise that this pass rush may get better over the next, 6 games than it has been over the last couple of games. And I did think Arnold Ebiketie was solid in this game. Again, you could argue that maybe he benefited from going up against Riley Reiff, who's probably well past his prime at that right tackle position. But as we've mentioned many times on this podcast this season, if and when Ebiketie can become a reliable producer as a pass rusher off the edge, that is going to be a huge boost to this Falcons pass rush, which will get it out of basically being one of the 3 to 5 worst pass rushes in the NFL, which is where they have been for most of this season, to a unit that at least is serviceable. Again, we're not going to, I don't think Arnold Ebiketie is going to suddenly morph into like a double-digit sack guy in the next 6 games, although, I'm not going to complain if he does. But like that can get you from, say, let's say we have the 29th best pass rush in the NFL, which probably is generous based off of certain metrics, but like, maybe that goes from 29 to like 23, right? And that's something it's much easier to build off of and get to league average potentially next year or better if your starting point is 23 and you need Arnold Ebiketie to take that step. And the other thing that I noticed in this game was that we saw Grady Jarrett get more looks at the 3 technique this week than we have seen really over the last 7-8 games since Anthony Rush's release, where Grady Jarrett has been getting the brunt of the work as the Falcons nose tackle. And it did seem like Grady Jarrett was a little bit more active as a pass rusher in this game than he had been in several games over the last month or 2. And so I do wonder about that. The Falcons did utilize a lot of 3-4 in this game with Abdullah Anderson more at that nose, presumably again because I think they wanted to get more bodies on the line of scrimmage. And so part of me wonders, is that specific to this matchup? Is that something that's going to continue where the Falcons go back to being more of a 3-4 defense moving forward than in the past? We'll talk a little bit later about a reason why I may not be as gung-ho on that notion. And then you kind of wonder, going up against the Commanders, and we'll talk about this tomorrow on the crossover Thursday possibly as one of those key matchups, is the kind of the weakest link of the Commanders offensive line is their center position. And so you kind of maybe want to get Grady Jarrett matched up more as that nose against that center, whether it's Tyler Larson or somebody else this week. So maybe this is just kind of a one-off sort of situation, but it does go back to the conversation of, if this pass rush is going to make strides and be better, by the time we get to December than it was certainly in September, October, and now into November, you do want to see Ebiketie's progress. You do want to see Grady Jarrett look more like the guy that in the first month of the season, we had guys like Jarvis Davis coming on the podcast and say, oh, Grady Jarrett's destined for a Pro Bowl year and an all-pro year. And, based off of the first 3 or 4 games, that assessment, that prediction seemed dead on at the point, and he's kind of slowed down, and maybe some of that's related to the fact that he's playing more nose than necessary 3 technique. So while I came away not as impressed with the pass rush in this game, I do think there is a path towards this pass rush looking better moving forward. If we continue to see progress from Ebiketie, we continue to see Grady Jarrett looking like the September Grady Jarrett as opposed to October, November Grady Jarrett. So we'll leave it there with that conversation, and up next we'll get into more listener questions. talking about the impact of the Will Compton signing, as well as talking more about the Falcons linebackers as we continue today's episode. But now a word from our sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. They're here to make it easier for you to find the people that you want to talk to faster and for free. You can create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach the world's largest professional network of over 800 million people. That's almost as many people that listen to the Locked On Falcons, right? And so LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you spread the word that you're hiring, gives you simple tools like screening questions so you can focus on the candidates with the right experience, the right skills, to quickly prioritize who you want to hire, who you want to interview. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the candidates that you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? That's almost as many people that listen to a single episode of Locked On Falcons every single week. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And guys, if you want to be one of the 40 million people that check out Locked On Falcons, of course, you can do so now on the Locked On Sports Atlanta app, available on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You get the same great local coverage 24/7 for free by downloading the Locked On Sports Atlanta app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV today. So our first question is from the Discord. It comes from Spacebar. He says, are the Falcons now Super Bowl contenders with the addition of Will Compton? So in case you missed it, Will Compton announced via his own Twitter on Monday night that he is now signing with the Falcons. Compton worked out for the Falcons in early October, basically like the week before they traded Deion Jones. And presumably Compton is here to play special teams, which makes you wonder a little bit about sort of what Nick Kwiatkowski's status has been, because he's been primarily their special teams guy at the linebacker position. Kwiatkowski in the Bears game, but he did return to the game. And part of you wonders, is this exhibit Q in terms of examples of the Falcons training staff with regime that send players back into games only for them to wind up on IR later this week. As of this recording, I haven't seen any news that Kwiatkowski is injured, so we'll pay attention to the practice report later in the week. But if it didn't look like Kwiatkowski was injured after that point because he was out there on special teams. But we'll sort of see about that. And, if Kwiatkowski is injured, part of you kind of goes like, okay, is Nate Landman, why not just have Nate Landman fill those shoes? He's been inactive like the last couple of weeks, he hasn't spent a ton of time on special teams. He's played some kickoff coverage, not I think he's had 0 snaps on punt coverage this year when he was playing. But it does make you go like, okay, why? Let's assume that Kwiatkowski is out for a week or two or whatever, however long. And you now promote, Nate, I don't know. It just basically makes me go like, oh, okay, that whole 3-4 versus 4-3, you would only want to have 5 healthy linebackers, off-ball linebackers, that is, on your roster if you were really sort of, rolling with the 4-3, right? As if you had the 3-4, like, you could get away with 4 healthy linebackers. So that, having that extra body makes me wonder sort of about that. But hopefully we'll get a little bit more clarity on that as the week unfolds. Our next Discord questions comes from God is Good. Hey, Aaron, I feel like our tackling was better in the first few weeks than what it's been as of late. WTF, what is going on? I haven't seen that. I haven't gotten that general impression, although I will say I don't really chart the run defense. When I'm charting the defense, I'm mostly focused on the coverage and whatnot. So I can't necessarily speak to how many times the Falcons have missed tackles against the run, early in the season versus recently. But at least in coverage, over the last 4 games, the Falcons, I've counted 13 missed tackles in coverage. Over the first 4 games, I counted 14 missed tackles. So there really hasn't been any difference, at least over the last 4 games versus the first 4 games. Maybe there's more difference between those middle 3 games. I don't know. I look at Pro Football Focus's, metrics, and they had 45 missed tackles over the last 4 games and 41 over the first 4 games. So again, not a huge difference there. Now, what's notable with Pro Football Focus's numbers, if you look at the first 4 games, edge rushers and defensive linemen only missed 9 tackles. Over the last 4, it's been 17. missed tackles from those two position groups, but some of that is on, like, say, Grady Jarrett getting penetration and not making the tackle in the backfield, but disrupting the play. And, PFF in their methodology charts that as a missed tackle. I don't really care about those sorts of missed tackles because, I believe that, disruption is production. To quote my good friend Josh Norris over at Underdog Fantasy, when it comes to that sort of thing. So that's just, one of 15 issues that I have with PFF's charting. But again, not, I know some of you guys take it a little too far and be like, oh, that's why PFF is trash. Like, no, it's just like, 80% of what they do is right. It's just part of the 20% that I disagree with. So, God is good. I don't have there's nothing I've seen that tells me that the tackling has been worse than it was earlier in the season, these last couple of games. So, I'm curious if other people have noticed that as well, and I'm just oblivious to that. But we'll go to our last question. Speaking of missed tackles, let's talk more about the linebackers. Our last question from the Discord comes from Harry and Gary. Hello, Aaron. We've seen Troy Andersen get more snaps each week. Can he earn the starting job over Mykal Walker? And I said this before when we talked about Troy Andersen, and I didn't think he played particularly well in this one start against the 49ers when everybody was declared to promote him over Mykal Walker. Then I don't get why we're sitting here talking about benching Mykal Walker. Again, I don't think Mykal Walker's play has been great this year. But like, I don't see why you would bench Mykal Walker over Rashaan Evans, right? Like, I feel like Mykal Walker, despite his concerns, is probably a better player than Rashaan Evans at this point in time, right? Like, for me, when I watch Mykal Walker, there have been two issues that stand out to me. One have it been mental errors, right, that he's made, but presumably you would think that with more experience, those mental errors will kind of go away. He hasn't played that many years as an off-ball linebacker. Like, he played his final year at Fresno State as an off-ball linebacker. He, as a rookie in Atlanta, he did dabble as an off-ball linebacker, but mostly was like an all outside linebacker when the Falcons were utilizing their 3-4 defense. Last year, he played some as an off-ball linebacker in like coverage situations. And this year is really kind of his third year as an off-ball linebacker. And this goes back to something I talked about earlier this offseason. And there was some confusion because I was talking about like year 3 and I was like, oh, next year will be year 3 of Troy Andersen playing off-ball linebacker, and people say, wait, Troy Andersen's a rookie. What does that mean? I meant year 3 of playing off-ball linebacker. When you count the 2 years at Montana State, and this year, this is his like third year as an off-ball linebacker. This is Mykal Walker's third year as an off-ball linebacker. And so, there's some growing pains that come with it. There's some youth and inexperience with that. So to me, like, that aspect of Mykal, like a couple of times in his Bears game where like there was one time where he kind of that time when they blitzed and he kind of jumped to try to block the pass on the throwing lane for Justin Fields rather than staying on his feet, and Fields just kind of ran right past him for like a 5-yard scramble. And he did bat down a pass earlier in the game, so maybe he thought he could get a second one. Now, I feel like he might have gotten a second pass batted down in this game, but maybe I'm just confusing the same play over again. And so that to me is a mental error where it's like, okay, stay on your feet, hit the quarterback, right? Like, your job is not to bat down the pass. Your job is to hit the quarterback, especially when you're blitzing. So you stay on your feet, you potentially get a sack rather than giving up a 5-yard play. And, there was maybe another missed tackle, I think a play or two later, that Mykal Walker. And that was just, again, that's probably the main issue I have with Mykal Walker, and which is, to me, what has led to a lot of his missed tackles, which is he has a tendency to play on his heels too much, right? And he should be playing on his toes. And like, that just allows you as a defender, if you're playing on your toes, you can kind of control and initiate contact and control the engagement a little bit better than playing on your heels where you're kind of breaking down and then you're letting the guy run into you, as opposed to you're not going to be able to be effective making those open field tackles. And so that to me is a tackling technique issue. And, I know the Dan Quinn regime was very keen on their ability to teach that. Again, we've touched upon this in the past. I don't know how much the Dean Pease regime focuses on that. I know that was a big point of emphasis under the Dan Quinn regime. So, presumably, theoretically, it can get better. So that's something, the two main concerns I have with Mykal Walker presumably can get better with time. Rashaan Evans is who he is. And the truth of the matter is, regardless of whether Walker or Evans is the worst of the two starters for the remainder of the year, Mykal Walker is going to be on the Falcons next year. He's under contract. He's on a rookie deal. There's no reason for him not to be back next year. Rashaan Evans is on a 1-year contract. And, unless he just plays absolutely lights out for the next 6 games, I don't see much of a chance of him coming back. So again, if you're going to bench Troy Andersen for somebody, I guess this is similar to the whole Desmond Ridder conversation, but we're not going there on today's episode. But if you're going to roll with somebody, one young guy over a veteran, it's going to be Andersen over Rashaan Evans, in my humble opinion, or Andersen over Mykal Walker. So, could we see Andersen starting? Sure. It just depends on whether this regime, similar to the conversation at the quarterback position, are willing to bench a underwhelming, I won't say underperforming, Marcus Mariota and Rashaan Evans are basically performing at my expectations for what it would be. It's just depending on how you feel about that. But we're not opening that can of worms, at least on the quarterback, on today's episode. So, that's kind of how I feel about it. So, I hope that answers your question. Yes, Troy Andersen could start, but I'm hoping it's for over Rashaan Evans, not Mykal Walker. That's my personal opinion, and apparently that seems to be a very minority opinion. But that's going to do it for us here, guys, on today's Q&A and All-22 review. Tomorrow, of course, will be a crossover Thursday. I think Friday will probably also be a Q&A. I know somebody asked me a question about Chase Young, and that just gives me carte blanche to go off on why I hate Chase Young. I've only really addressed it on the podcast a couple of times, extensively in 2020 when I was talking about who should make the Pro Bowl, and why I didn't think Chase Young was as deserving of making the Pro Bowl as he was hyped to be. And that goes, we'll get into it on Friday. Right. But tomorrow is crossover Thursday with David Harrison, one of the hosts of Locked On Commanders. We'll get into that on tomorrow's episode. If you want to have your questions answered potentially on Friday, you can send them via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Hit me up on Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons. Leave a comment here on Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And you can hit me up in the Discord, Locked On Falcons, the link in the description below, guys. Really appreciate it. Make sure for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Braves, and Locked On Bulldogs, as well as the other great Locked On shows here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Locked On.